All right, guys. We are going to do a charging system check on our own vehicles. So I'm going to do this on my little car here. Don't make fun of my car. It's a piece of crap. All right. But still, should be able to do all this on everyone's vehicle as well. All right. So I have this little battery charging system checklist I want you guys to go through, and then we're just going to fill out these columns and kind of assess where we're at. So looking at the first thing, it says visually inspect the battery connectors and clean if necessary. So I'm coming over here to my battery, and I'm looking like if I have all this white stuff right here, battery acid all over the place, I really want to clean all that stuff off. So I'm going to take a second here and pull these battery terminals off and kind of give them a little scrub down. All right, so now that I get that cleaned off, I could have done a little better, and I'm going to vacuum up all that battery acid residue down there at the bottom here in a second. But with my car still off, I'm going to go ahead and turn my voltmeter here to voltage DC. Now, if you have a range there, you want to go to the voltage DC 20 volt setting. We're expecting our battery to be somewhere between 12 and 13 volts. So that 20 volt setting, that makes that we're able to measure between 0 and 20 volts. And so that puts us in our range that we want to look at. So just a basic battery test. Car is not running, checking the voltage out of my battery. I just drove here to work, so it's probably a little charged up right now, but you should be expecting anywhere from 12.4. I'm a little high here to 12.8, but that should be just fine. My battery looks like it's operating correctly so far. All right, we'll move on to the next one. The next one, you're going to have to locate your alternator. So if you look here, you're visually going to inspect your alternator belts for cracks or tears. So mine's pretty easy on this car. It's kind of out here in the front. Here's my alternator right here, and I'm just going to look at my belt. You can't see the whole thing, but you just want to look to see if you see any cracks, tears, or frays. All right? And so this one looks pretty good, so I would go ahead and mark good on that one. If you do see any tears or cracks in your belt, you probably want to replace that. Go ahead and check it as bad. Or if you just see a little wear and tear, you don't think it's too bad right now, not worth the money to replace it, you can just check it off as okay. And then the last thing we want to check is our alternator connector. All right. Mine had this little cap on top. So this right here is the positive post for my alternator connector. This housing, this harness right here, that's my internal voltage regulator inside my alternator. All right. You may have one of these, or if it's an older car, you may have an external regulator, and then you have some different wiring for that. So I'm checking I pulled this little cap off that was sitting on there like that. I just kind of popped it off. And that's my positive power leading back to my battery from my alternator. And so I'm looking at that to make sure it's not corroded. All my contacts look good. This one looks pretty good. All right. And I'm go ahead and just visually inspect my wires as they're going back. Now in this car, it seems to kind of wrap around the back of the motor a little bit and kind of pops back up over here and comes back into my battery. All right, and it goes through a couple different connectors and kind of splices out. So I can't follow it all the way back because it goes into some conduit. But just looking at it, I'm looking right near my connectors. All my wires look good here. They're all covered up. Nothing's exposed. Going all the way back, it looks good as far as I can see. Then I can come over here, and I'm gonna look where my batteries are coming back into my wires are coming back into my battery, and everything's looking pretty good there. And no open wires or exposed wires. So I'm gonna go ahead and mark that as good. All right, let me get set up for the next test and vacuum up this mess. All right, so I cleaned up my mess, ready to go. Now for the rest of the test on here, you want your car on. All right, so while my car is running, I'm gonna do another battery test, and I'm expecting it anywhere between 14.2 and 15 volts. All right, because now I'm putting a charge on my battery, so I should be reading a little higher. So I'm looking like I'm within spec right there. After that, you want to go ahead and rev your engine. Now I have my throttle right here, so I can just go ahead and do this right here. You may need to, if you don't have it accessible like that, you may need to get into your car and have someone else rev the engine while you're taking a reading. But as my alternator increases in RPMs, it should be creating more voltage. All right, and I have a voltage regulator in there that should actually be limiting the amount of voltage, because I don't want to send any more than 15 volts to this battery. That's going to start to cook my battery and it's going to drain my system. So And plus, you don't have, your car is not made to operate on anything over 15 volts, so you may short out some other systems in your car. If that's happening, you have a voltage regulator problem. Now, in my case, my voltage regulator is inside my alternator, and I actually just don't know. I may have, if I have a voltage regulator problem, I have to probably replace my entire alternator. I'd have to look at it a little closer. If you have an external voltage regulator, you can just swap out that part if that's the problem. So I'm gonna go ahead and start revving my engine, and I'm gonna watch this, and it shouldn't go above 15 volts. All right, that stayed really good. So that shows me that my voltage regulator is probably working just fine. Next thing, according to my paper here, I'm gonna do a visual inspection of the alternator pulley and belt. So all I'm looking for here, again, I can't see my whole belt unless it's rolling around, so I'm just making sure there's no wobble in there. Everything seems to be moving pretty smoothly. Just a visual inspection. So unless you see a lot of vibration or, again, a wobble on that pulley, you should be just fine. All right, so now we gotta do a load test on our alternator. And we're gonna do this by turning on as many things inside of our vehicle as we can. And then we're gonna check our voltage reading to make sure that it's able to handle all the loads that we're gonna put on our car. All right, so I'm gonna go inside the car and turn on everything. All right, so I'm gonna turn on my headlights. I'm gonna turn on my AC. I'm gonna turn on my radio. I'll turn on my hazard lights. I'll turn on my, let's see, what else do I got? I got my rear defrost. All right, so I got a bunch of things on right now. I got my hazards on, I got my headlights on, I got my radio on, I got my AC on. I'll turn the volume up on that. All right, now let's go take a look. So I was running about 14.2. Now that I have a load on there, I'm dropping down a little bit. That's expected. You're using up a lot of stuff going on right now, but I shouldn't drop below 13 volts. So as long as I'm above 13 volts, I'm pretty good. I'm gonna go ahead and increase the RPM. All right, that's my load test right there, and everything came within what I expected. So everything's looking pretty good so far. Let me set up for the voltage drop test now. All right, I'm gonna do my voltage drop test. So I got my leads here. It doesn't really matter which lead you use for this. If you haven't wired up backwards, you'll get a negative number on that, but it's still the same number, so it shouldn't matter. Is what I'm gonna check here is that I have a good connection from that positive post on my alternator to my battery. So that wiring that went all the way around the back of my motor there, all the way back around over here to my battery, I'm making sure that that's a good connection and I don't have a lot of corrosion, which is increasing resistance, which is one of our 4 faults. All right, so I should see a voltage drop here. I want it to be under 0.2. Right now, that's just a little static noise. Those are millivolts, so they're not really a big deal. So I'm gonna go ahead and put my positive lead right there, and I'm gonna take my other lead. Hopefully it's long enough. And I'm just gonna touch it to the top of my post right there. All right. And now when I'm taking a reading, so those are millivolts. I don't know if you guys can see that. Because this one, so you may get something like 0.07 or something like that, 0.02, and that's just fine. It's bouncing around a little bit, which may indicate I could have probably cleaned that a little better and even taken that bolt off that you see towards the top there. I didn't do that and redo that connection. All right, but I'm reading about 1 millivolts. So as long as I'm under 0.2, I should be pretty good right there. All right. The next thing, the last thing I'm going to check here is I'm going to go ahead and move this terminal over to my ground. And I'm going to check my ground connection to make sure I don't have a lot of resistance in that connection. All right. Now your alternator, the housing of your alternator is grounded. It's, for me, it looks like there's that bracket right there. You can see above that belt. That bracket's bolted to the motor. The motor's probably, the engine block's probably grounded, or I guarantee it's grounded. And so that's where it's getting its ground connection. So actually anywhere on the metal housing of my alternator is considered a ground. So I'm just gonna go ahead and touch my alternator anywhere on that housing, and I'm gonna look over here, and I'm getting about 10 millivolts. All right, so that's 0.01 volts. That's not a whole lot at all, so I have a good connection right there. So just to recap, guys, going through all this stuff, I'm gonna go ahead and mark down my readings. All right, visual inspection on my battery, that was good. Voltage reading, I was reading about 12.8, little high, but still, that's good. Visual inspection on my belt, that's good. Visual inspection of alternator, that was just fine. Voltage reading on battery, while the car was on, I believe I was 14.4. And so that's all good. I brought my RPMs and it was still less than 15, letting me know that my voltage regulator is working good. So I was okay there. I forget what it came out as. I should have recorded that number. I think it was 14.8, but I'll go back and watch the video. I did a load test on my battery. So I turned on everything and then I made sure that my voltage maintained above 13. And I was actually close to 14. All right, so that was good. And then I did a voltage drop test. That's when I measured the voltage that I'm losing along my wire between my alternator and my battery. And I was getting like, you know, 0.1 volts from my positive side and like 0.01 on my ground. So I was looking really good there as well. So those are all good. So if you guys could get your meter, you're gonna do all those tests, mark this sheet right here, and this is what you're gonna turn back into me so I know that you've completed everything. All right, if you guys have any questions, let me know. Hopefully this made sense.